The cameras were rolling, the audience was cheering, and then 17-year-old Sage Thompson stood at the Family Feud podium with the carefully practiced posture and facial expression that had taken them years to perfect, their body language calibrated to appear relaxed and confident, while their mind worked frantically to process social cues, monitor their own behavior, and maintain the exhausting performance of appearing neurotypical that had consumed their energy every day for as long as they could remember. When Steve Harvey asked about the most tiring thing you do every day, Sage's response, delivered with the first moment of genuine authenticity they had allowed themselves in years, would reveal the hidden cost of living with high-functioning autism in a world that demands constant social camouflage. Trying to look normal, Sage had said, their voice carrying the weight of 17 years spent analyzing every facial expression, rehearsing every conversation, and suppressing every natural instinct in order to blend into a social world that felt like speaking a foreign language without ever being allowed to admit they needed translation. I have autism, but I've gotten so good at hiding it that everyone thinks I'm just like them. But pretending to be neurotypical every single day is exhausting me. The studio had fallen into a thoughtful silence as everyone present began to understand that they were witnessing someone whose apparent social competence had been achieved through years of careful study and performance, and that what looked like natural social ability was actually the result of constant draining effort to mask fundamental differences in how their brain processed the world. Sage Thompson had been diagnosed with high-functioning autism at age 15, though they had been struggling with the challenges of autism spectrum disorder their entire life without understanding why social situations felt so overwhelming, why they needed detailed scripts for conversations, and why they felt like they were constantly acting in a play where everyone else had been given the script except them. High-functioning autism, now often referred to as autism spectrum disorder level 1, is characterized by significant challenges with social communication and restricted repetitive behaviors, but without the intellectual disability or severe language delays that are associated with other forms of autism. People with high-functioning autism often develop sophisticated masking strategies that allow them to appear neurotypical in many situations, but this social camouflage comes at an enormous psychological and emotional cost. Sage's masking had begun in elementary school when they had started to notice that their natural ways of communicating and behaving were different from their peers and often resulted in social rejection, teasing, or punishment from adults who interpreted their autism traits as rudeness, defiance, or attention-seeking behavior. In response, Sage had begun the exhausting process of learning to suppress their natural instincts and perform neurotypical behaviors. The masking strategies that Sage had developed over the years included carefully monitoring their facial expressions to ensure they appeared appropriately engaged and emotional, forcing eye contact even though it felt uncomfortable and overwhelming, suppressing their natural stimming behaviors that helped them self-regulate, and memorizing social scripts for common interactions so they could participate in conversations without revealing their confusion about unwritten social rules. Sage had also learned to camouflage their intense special interests, which included detailed knowledge of linguistics and ancient history, because they had discovered that sharing these interests in natural autistic ways with intense enthusiasm and extensive detail made peers uncomfortable and marked them as different. Instead, they had learned to portion out their knowledge in socially acceptable doses and to fake interest in topics that their peers found engaging but that felt meaningless to Sage. The sensory challenges that came with Sage's autism had required additional masking strategies that were particularly exhausting. They had learned to tolerate overwhelming sounds, lights, textures, and crowds without showing visible signs of distress, even though these sensory experiences were often painful or disorienting. They had developed elaborate techniques for managing sensory overload while maintaining the appearance of comfort and normalcy. The emotional regulation difficulties that characterized Sage's autism had been perhaps the most challenging aspect to mask. They had learned to suppress meltdowns and shutdowns, to hide their overwhelming anxiety about social situations, and to perform emotional responses that they didn't naturally feel or understand. This emotional masking had created a profound disconnection between Sage's internal experience and their external presentation. The cost of maintaining these masking strategies had been enormous and had accumulated over years of constant performance. Sage experienced what many autistic people call masking fatigue or autistic burnout, a state of complete emotional, physical, and cognitive exhaustion that resulted from the constant effort required to appear neurotypical. This exhaustion affected every aspect of their life, from academic performance to family relationships to their sense of self and identity. The social benefits of masking had been significant, but had come with hidden costs. Sage's ability to appear neurotypical had protected them from some forms of discrimination and bullying, had allowed them to maintain friendships and romantic relationships, and had helped them succeed academically in environments that weren't designed to accommodate autistic learning styles. But these benefits had come at the expense of authentic self-expression and had created a profound sense of loneliness and disconnection. The most painful aspect of Sage's masking was the way it had created distance between their authentic self and their relationships with others. Friends and family members knew and loved the masked version of Sage, but they had no understanding of Sage's real personality, needs, struggles, or perspectives. This had created a lonely existence where Sage felt that they could never be truly known or loved for who they actually were. Sage's family had been well-intentioned, but had unknowingly reinforced the pressure to mask by praising Sage for appearing normal, for fitting in socially, and for not causing problems or drawing attention to themselves. Sarah and Michael Thompson had interpreted Sage's social success as evidence that they were thriving, not understanding that this success was achieved through constant stress and self-suppression. The diagnosis of autism at age 15 had been both validating and complicated for Sage. While it had provided an explanation for their lifelong struggles and had helped them understand that their differences were neurological rather than personal failings, it had also raised difficult questions about whether to continue masking or to risk the social consequences of being more authentically autistic. Sage had begun working with therapists who specialized in autism and masking, learning about the importance of self-advocacy, authentic self-expression, and finding balance between social accommodation and personal authenticity. But unmasking was a complex process that involved risk, vulnerability, and the potential loss of relationships and opportunities that had been built on the masked version of themselves. The academic pressures of high school had intensified Sage's masking challenges, as they had been expected to navigate increasingly complex social environments while managing demanding coursework and college preparation. The stress of maintaining their social camouflage while pursuing academic success had pushed Sage toward complete burnout and had forced them to begin questioning whether the benefits of masking were worth the psychological costs. Sage had also begun connecting with online autistic communities, where they could express their authentic personality without judgment, and had started to understand that many of the traits they had been taught to suppress were actually valuable aspects of their neurodiversity that contributed to their unique perspective and abilities. The Family Feud application had been submitted by Michael Thompson, who had hoped that participating in a fun family activity might help Sage feel proud of their intelligence and quick thinking while providing a break from the academic and social pressures that had been overwhelming them. He had thought that succeeding in a different type of challenge might help Sage rebuild confidence and energy. During the pre-show preparation, Sage had been performing their usual social mask, appearing friendly and engaged while internally monitoring every interaction and carefully managing their responses to ensure they appeared appropriately enthusiastic and normal. The production team had been impressed by their articulate responses and social competence, not recognizing the enormous effort required to maintain this presentation. The game had been proceeding with Sage participating skillfully, demonstrating the intelligence and social awareness that their masking strategies had developed, but also showing subtle signs of the exhaustion that came from constant performance. The Thompson family was competing against the Garcia family from Texas, and while both sides had been playing with good energy, there was something slightly mechanical about Sage's engagement that suggested they were running on autopilot rather than genuine enthusiasm. But when it came time for the category, the most tiring thing you do every day, and it was Sage's turn at the buzzer, the question had struck directly at the heart of their daily experience and the exhausting performance that defined every aspect of their social existence. Steve Harvey had approached the podium with his usual warm energy, but something about Sage's carefully controlled demeanor and the slight tension in their posture had made him more observant and gentle than usual. "All right, Sage," Steve had said warmly, "the most tiring thing you do every day. What comes to mind?" For the first time since the cameras had started rolling, Sage had allowed their mask to slip slightly, their carefully maintained social expression giving way to genuine exhaustion and vulnerability. "Trying to look normal," Sage had said, their words carrying 17 years of social performance and the recognition that they had been living a lie that was slowly destroying their sense of self. "I have autism, but I've gotten so good at hiding it that everyone thinks I'm just like them. But pretending to be neurotypical every single day is exhausting me." The studio had become very quiet as everyone present tried to understand what it meant to discover that someone's apparent social competence was actually the result of constant draining performance rather than natural ability. Steve had paused, clearly intrigued by this revelation and wanting to understand more about Sage's experience. Sage, Steve had said gently, help me understand what it means to mask your autism. What does that look like? It means constantly monitoring my facial expressions to make sure I look interested and engaged, Sage had explained, their voice gaining strength as they spoke authentically for the first time in years. It means forcing eye contact even though it's overwhelming. It means hiding my real interests because they're too intense. It means pretending to understand social cues that make no sense to me. The studio audience had listened with growing understanding and concern as they learned about the hidden costs of appearing neurotypical when your brain works differently. Why do you feel like you have to hide who you are? Steve had asked with obvious compassion. Because when I act naturally autistic, people think I'm rude or weird or broken, Sage had said with painful honesty. It's easier to pretend to be normal than to deal with people trying to fix me or exclude me. Steve had looked at Sarah and Michael Thompson, who were clearly processing this information with surprise and concern. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, Steve had said, what do you think about what Sage just shared? We had no idea, Sarah had said, tears forming in her eyes. We thought Sage was doing so well socially, we didn't realize it was all an act. Michael had nodded, his voice filled with regret. We've been praising Sage for fitting in, not knowing that fitting in was killing them, Michael had said. We need to learn how to support their authentic self instead of rewarding them for hiding it. Steve had looked at Sage with deep respect and understanding. Sage, Steve had said, what you've just done, telling the truth about your experience, showing us your authentic self, that takes incredible courage. You've been working so hard to be someone you're not that you've forgotten how valuable you are exactly as you are. Steve had begun removing his suit jacket, understanding that this moment required recognition of Sage's exhaustion and validation of their authentic identity. Sage, Steve had said, placing the jacket around their shoulders, this jacket represents something very important today. It represents the understanding that you don't need to hide who you are to be accepted. Your autism isn't something that needs to be fixed or hidden, it's part of what makes you unique and valuable. Sage had pulled the jacket closer, and for the first time in years their posture and expression had been genuinely relaxed rather than carefully performed. Steve had turned to address the studio audience. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve had announced, Sage Thompson is teaching us something crucial about acceptance and authenticity. They're showing us that forcing people to camouflage their differences doesn't make those differences go away, it just makes people exhausted and lonely. The game had resumed with Sage participating more authentically, allowing some of their natural autistic traits to show rather than maintaining their exhausting performance. When Steve had asked the final question about things that take real courage, Sage had answered, being yourself when the world wants you to be someone else. The episode aired 4 months later and became a powerful educational tool about autism masking and the importance of accepting neurodiversity. Autism advocacy organizations used Sage's story to help people understand the hidden costs of forcing autistic individuals to camouflage their differences. Sage had kept Steve's jacket as a symbol of the moment when they began the difficult but liberating process of unmasking and learning to live authentically. More importantly, their family had begun educating themselves about autism and had started supporting Sage's authentic self-expression rather than rewarding social performance. The jacket represented Sage's understanding that authenticity requires courage but creates genuine connection, that masking protects from rejection but prevents real acceptance, and that the exhaustion of pretending to be neurotypical was a price too high to pay for social approval. Because that's what authenticity looks like when it chooses truth over performance. That's what courage sounds like when it risks rejection to achieve genuine acceptance. And that's what happens when a 17-year-old person teaches everyone around them that neurodiversity should be celebrated rather than camouflaged, and that the most exhausting thing anyone can do is spend their life pretending to be someone they're not. Sage Thompson had been masking their autism for so long they had almost forgotten who they really were. But on that day at Family Feud, they discovered that their authentic self was worthy of love and acceptance, and that the energy they had been spending on social camouflage could be redirected toward being genuinely, courageously, beautifully themselves.